Hey everyone, this is Dr. Mina Blazy, and I have been in the education arena for about 25 years. I am a former science teacher, and now I'm in educational leadership. And I'm going to let my identical twin sister introduce herself.
So I'm Carrie Little. I live in Illinois, and my experience in education is I get to educate and train adults in the real estate sector on technology and real estate license law. Oh, that sounds exciting.
No, well, and today we're going to have a conversation about the impact of real estate and education, specifically from K-12 education. And I'm going to let my sister tell her story, and then I'm going to tell you my story, and then we're going to have just an informal conversation about what is happening around the United States. Go ahead.
So when Mina said, let's just have a conversation around real estate and education or real estate and kids. I'm like, okay, let's that I think that would be good because back in the 90s or the late 90s is when I purchased my first house. Now, prior to that, I lived in a rental. The one great thing I think our mom did for us was that she sold the house, moved, and made us grow up. But after that, both of us rented. And I remember one day saying, you know what, I just really need to own a home. So, and just to fast forward, I now own this home. We're living in the same property. And right away, I experienced my kids feeling the stabilization of their environment, going to the same schools, having the same friends, and being able to just, play with the people in the neighborhood, go to the same swimming pool, all the way from, it's for some of them kindergarten all the way through high school. And I found that there's something about being in the same place. Now, we could argue that there are people that travel all over the world because our mother is retired military. We didn't have to travel, and they have a different educational, opportunity. But there is something to be said about being stable. So, let me just say this, Dr. Blazy, her experience might be a little bit different.
Right. And okay, my mic was off. My experience is different, meaning I moved from Illinois to Ohio to California, Palm Springs. And all four of my children didn't, they were in a stable environment when we were in that area, but I moved them around. So I had to teach them how to create friends or how to create long lasting friendships. My oldest child had friends in Ohio, and they even visited here in California. And then I not only did I move them to California in the Palm Springs, Coachella Valley area, I then moved them an hour and a half north to another school district. So they experienced, I think my daughter said she was probably in 8 or 9 different schools. And I don't mean like in 1 year, I mean from elementary, middle, and high school. And we define stability differently, meaning I was able to give them a foundation in education. And two of my daughters, one will finish college in a year, the other one finished college. One went to the military, and the other one didn't go to college, which took college courses. But there is a difference. And I think what we're talking about with stability as well is what does it look like even in the school district? Like, meaning high quality schools, they attract high quality teachers because their funding might be better. They might get thousands of applicants, and they can choose from the applicants before they interview. I remember somebody telling me in a school district that they get over 4,000 applicants, and this is a highly the demographics. There's a lot of money in the district. They get over 4,000 applicants for an English teacher for the high school. And there are some school districts that they're not as affluent. They don't have as much money because in California, the schools are, for the most part, are funded by the taxes on the housing. So you like Beverly Hills, more money.
Let me
Desert
ask
Hot
this
Springs,
question.
less money.
because we've talked about this before. And, I live in a community where you actually did the research. 82% of the kids speak another language first. And I could give you the whole history about the city that I live in and why that is so, because it wasn't always true. We were a Germantown. And then the people that lived here and, not just lived here, but worked on the railroad. We had boxcar kids that there was a shift during World War II. And so now we have kids that where 82% of the kids speak another language. And the one thing you had said to me was when you have kids that move a lot, and this I believe when you I don't know if you were still in Ohio or if you were in Southern California, you said, Carrie, when you have kids wherever they are and parents don't send those kids to school, the school loses money in the public sector. I
In
remember you.
California.
So, and then I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And why in the first few weeks we need kids to show up because our communities need the money. And if we were to tie that into, when we talk about stability for a kid is great, but there is something about owning a home that makes your community stronger and actually gives the homeowner a little more leverage when they're working with their communities when they want things to be accomplished. So the question I'm asking is, when we talk about stability, how do we help, parents understand the value of keeping your kids in the same place or in the same schools, and then tying that into home ownership so our public school systems get the funding. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't go to private school, because I had one of our kids went to private school all the way through elementary.
Well, depending on what state you're in, like Ohio, whether you go to school or not, the school districts are getting the money, public school. And there are some school districts in the state of California that are funded based on the community because their taxes, they get the housing is a lot more expensive, so they have more money, so they're not funded by the state, for example. So it doesn't matter if the students come to school or not. So the value of education and the value of we need you to come to school because the area might be economically disadvantaged, because for every day that you're not in the classroom, the state doesn't necessarily send the money. They do a mathematical formula based on the average daily attendance for the school year. But what I wanted to actually say to this is I had a parent once say to me, all you care about is the money, not my child's education, which helped me realize. And when I would do um, uh, an assembly at the beginning of the year, like we're going to have a back to school conversation and a parent night, I had to give them the math and say, when you don't come to school, we don't get this money. And it's not about just paying for the school. We do have to pay for the educators. We have to keep the lights on, and we need access to resources. And it's those resources in those school communities is why we want students to come to school. That doesn't mean that we want you to not enjoy family experiences and might be a one-time vacation and it's a family reunion. You should go. Definitely. Somebody recently said we can't get those memories back. You absolutely can't get those memories back. But the value of education for some people is different. And culturally, we need to flip the switch and be okay with that, because you and I grew up in a middle class home. There are some people, depending on where they are, they grow up in a different type of environment, and the value of education is different because when they leave high school, their family says you need to go to work. And until we say, okay, go to work, and can they still get a higher education if that works for them? And how do we help them afford it? I mean, there's so many questions about valuing education and how people can access it, which is a totally another podcast, because I had someone recently tell me, my child isn't doing well in school. My child is in an alternative setting. However, makes more money than I do on YouTube. And so we value education, but accessing education is changing. And we know that because COVID told parents you better stay home if they have the sniffles. And we haven't flip the switch on that in someone's brain, because if they have the sniffles, parents are staying home. In the California, it is, it used to be, well, it still is. Don't come to school if you're, I'm going to say it, if your child has diarrhea, vomiting, or has a fever. Now it's
I don't want you
parents,
to come to work if you got that, but
right?
anyway.
But people do it. But now it's, we have parents that are like, I'm not sending my child to school if they have the sniffles, because I don't know if they have COVID and I don't want to give it to someone else. And then there may be a flip side where somebody's like, I'm sending my child to school. But just to go back to that question, the impact of what is happening in the community changes the journey of the child and how they access the real estate industry later, because their value on education may not get them to the next place where they can actually purchase or buy a house, because of the demographics and the value of what's happening in that community. So what
And
are your
that's in,
thoughts about that?
you know, because for me, this, when I remember when I wanted to purchase my first home, we as parents, if you are someone that's listening to the podcast, or of families, whether you're in education and real estate, and you're in a space where people don't own, I would say have a conversation with families, friends on the value of home ownership for this reason. You have when you live in the same community, there's stability and there's power in your voice. And if you were to look up the data, you can go Google it, you can go to Pew Research. Anyone that is, depending on which state you're in, I did the research in Illinois. If someone moves to Illinois and then becomes a citizen, they are more likely to purchase and own in Illinois than someone that has lived here their entire life and their family has never owned. So and we call that, first time home buyers. Yes. But there's also first generational buyers. And these are people that could be missing when it comes to home ownership, because they're more likely to move in, to whatever rental they can find. However, if we can change the narrative and educate on building wealth for the future, they will change the lives for their children, because, home ownership, not only is it a key factor in building wealth, it can provide long-term security, financial security for kids. What does that mean? It means, when they're stable, their parents keep the same home, they build equity in the home, assuming they never pull out cash, different podcast. And then when the kids go to school, and then all of a sudden the parents are like, okay, we want to downsize. The parents have money they can put in the bank, or the parents have money that they might help, for their kids to go to college. Or the other wealth building strategy for, parents is we own this home, we can keep this home, but then they can talk to their kids about, when you graduate from high school, the value of going to college is, when you graduate from college, that's your job history. And so now when someone employs you, within the first few weeks of employment, you qualify for a mortgage. And then and I'm going to say, I really hope and wish, whether it's the real estate sector or the education sector, that we start to educate kids in school on money, even entrepreneurship. We educate kids on, you need to go get a job, you need to go get a trade, and then they end up working for someone for the rest of their lives, which is fine. But what we forget to do is talk to them about money and finances. And we even, we forget to educate our kids in our home. And there are times when I'm like, did I do them a good service by not showing them the gas bill, the electric bill, the cable bill, every bill? Right now it's the Hulu, the Netflix, the YouTube TV bill. If we can educate kids on finances, the value of delayed gratification, you don't have to have it today, putting money aside, going to college and getting a part-time job in college, if you're not in a sport or something where, you're in a certain sector where you have a scholarship where you have to show up for something, putting money aside. And then when you graduate from college, owning, if we could just do that, we would change the stability of kids in the future, especially in underserved communities. Because you said something important earlier, Mina, of, you get thousands of applicants for teachers in areas where you have great schools, or schools that are deemed to be the best schools. But wouldn't that change if we could educate kids in all areas on the value of homeownership for the future. And then we rebuild these areas where we're not seeing grocery stores, and we don't have, the big chain stores, and we don't have jobs because people don't want to be there because schools aren't great. I mean, we could literally change the narrative if we can have conversations with young people. Maybe that's our new YouTube channel, how to invest and build wealth as kids. We talk to the elementary school, we talk to the high school, middle school, and high school. So when they go to college, they know that they should be looking at purchasing, because you can purchase in Illinois, own that house for 3+ years, and then make it a rental. There's still rules, and then move somewhere else. You have your first rental property, and you can consistently build wealth every 3 to 5 years. So yeah. So Mina, like, let me know, what are your thoughts on that? What are you thinking? Do you think that this could be an entirely new conversation?
Yeah, and my mic and my I have to make sure my mic is on. It is a new conversation, and there is a perspective that I want to be clear. Excuse me. When children are in apartments with their families, you said something. They tend to be what we call in education transient. If they find a better apartment, it's bigger and it's cheaper, they might leave, they might move, and it might be moved from one district to another. So there's instability in that. It doesn't mean the family's not stable. I want to be clear. They may have a stable family environment, mom, dad, family, just whatever, just mom, just dad, aunt, uncle. It might be two families living together. They're stable in that environment, but they're just unstable, or they're transient, and it may take them from one school district to another school district, and now they are leaving friends behind, and they have to learn a new environment. But then there is the trauma kids, that foster kids, and trying to get to them, and they're just trying to, what we would call, survive. I want to just mention that we're aware of that. We're not talking about that today. That's another day. We're talking about the instability of an apartment or renting a home, because if that homeowner is renting and they're like, I'm done, I'm going to sell it, at the end of the lease you still have to move, and there may not be another rental for you to get in that area. But when it comes to the high quality education of children, and I'm not saying that doesn't necessarily happen in school areas that are, they don't have as many resources, because there are great teachers in these schools. There are teachers that are stable in schools because of what we call tenure. And in the state of California, depending on the school district, if they're not given emergency contracts, after 2 years, you become what we call tenure, meaning you own your job. So that teacher is well vested in staying in that school district. So if they're a great teacher, they can get kids talking and engage and increase their learning. That's a great place to be no matter where you are. However, if these younger teachers that are coming out, they don't look at tenure the same way. So they may be in a school district, and if they're a good teacher and they're in a low performing school and it's the middle of the school year and they know that they can leave and apply to another school district, they leave and they're the ones that go to these other districts, because now they have 3-4 years under their belt and they're gone. So they're taking these high quality school districts with all these resources, with all this money, are taking the trained teachers and leaving. But the people who live there don't leave, and they are in an environment that may not be as academically sound. And these other districts with all the money, they can provide what we call continuing education or professional development, teacher training, access, supplies, math manipulatives, science manipulatives. They can go on trips or field trips that give them access. Here in California, we have access to marine biology, the ocean. They have access to different things. You said something about financial stability. The financial stability of the school district changes the demographics in the area. Like, I live in an area where my kids are out of college, out of school, like they're not in the K-12 system, but I pay taxes. So I'm vested in that school district because I want the school district to perform well, because we are building properties, and the people that come in, they're going to have a voice too. So I want to keep the community going. I want to make sure that the school is hiring the right people and hiring the right leadership. So I'm very vested in what happens, especially even though I don't have kids.
What's interesting is we could literally come up with so many different conversation out of this conversation, because there's, the conversation around, how do you improve the areas, or how do we get teachers to be vested? How do we get parents to be vested in the cities they live in, whether they rent or own, so they can have the same resources that the more affluent areas have. But let me say, because when we talk about, renter versus buyer or homeowner, renters, they will often have less disposable income, and
Yeah,
often landlords are more willing to allow someone to rent, where, they're allowing them to rent at a higher amount, meaning they can't save money. And so then, if they spend higher percentages of their income on housing, then they can't save money to buy. So how do, we could literally have a whole conversation around how do we change the narrative in the communities where we don't have as many resources, so we can encourage teachers and parents to invest in home ownership. Because when they own in a community, they tend to be more involved in their communities. Like, we show up to the city council meetings, we show
yes,
up to the school district.
yep.
We're more involved, because in my community, the culture is, in some countries, that, once I send the kids to school, teachers, you take them. Once they come home, I got them. So there, I mean, there's so many different conversations around getting parents to be involved, because when a parent is involved, whether the school scores are seem to be low, even if they're lower, when a parent is involved, it almost doesn't matter where the kid goes to school. That kid can be successful because the parent shows up, the parent's making
Yeah,
sure they're getting their
fact.
schoolwork done.
It didn't matter where my kids went to school, and they didn't go in the most affluent schools. They were going to perform well because I owned and I was very vested in that community. And that's the key in education and real estate. How do we get how do we make sure that the impact of real estate is helping education, and the opposite? How is the educational arena impacting the real estate industry? Because if people are coming in and just building apartments and tearing down houses and building apartments, they're going to
You're
impact the
encouraging
resources.
you're encouraging no home ownership. So
Yep.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways we could talk about the value of home ownership, because if I own in a community, I want to see, I want to see, the mom and pop stores, but I also want to see grocery stores. I want to see different restaurants. I want to see public transportation. I want to see park districts. I want the library to be successful, because when you have all of this, then your kids can live, work, play, and learn in their communities, which makes the community much more stable.
And I want to end with this, because you said something. They have restaurants and they have transportation. If they don't have that, and there's a lot of apartments, they tend to have what we call a food desert. They don't have the nice grocery stores, they don't have access to good food, and the people in the community don't have the same resources. Because where I live now, I have what I call a bougie grocery store, and even though there's one that's slightly closer, I'm going to the grocery store where I feel like it is fun to go to the grocery store and I can get good vegetables and fruit. But when they have what we call a food desert, that means they have to travel farther to get to the grocery store. And now we're tapping into more of their resources because they pay high rent. They have to travel farther to get groceries. They're less likely to travel farther to get groceries. They get bad food. Their nourishment isn't the same, which impacts their education in the classroom. Because when children are tired because they ate foods that make them, the word is lethargic, lazy, tired, sleepy, they're not learning. Everything can impact the community's environment, will impact what is happening in the classroom. And home ownership is a huge, that is a basic need in communities to keep them to thrive. So I'm in
And
a
wait,
Blazy. Oh,
before
okay.
you let me throw this in, because just to add to that, if you when a community has grocery stores, and when they have all of these, grocery stores, restaurants, park districts, you name it, public transportation, clothing stores, the
Nice
chain
pools,
stores, the
resources.
the then I don't have to leave the city
Yep.
to shop, and then the city has tax money on from those businesses.
Yeah.
So there's so many different aspects to the conversation around real estate and education, because it could literally be real estate, education, and economic development.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I'm Mina Blazy. And make sure you follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. I am Mina J. Blazy everywhere except on YouTube. I'm MJ Blazy.
And I am Carrie Little. If you wanted to learn more about the conversation around real estate and education, keep joining us here. I am Carrie Joe Little everywhere.